Do you ever feel hooked or triggered? No matter how enlightened you may aim to be, we all have those moments of reaction that can leave you feeling pretty sucky, throw you off your game, and feeling completely out of alignment with who you really are. In today's video, we're talking about how to recognize and diffuse a trigger right at its point of origin so that you can choose to respond rather than react. Hi, I'm Spencer Snakard, and on this channel I help entrepreneurs and transformational leaders like you to own your power and set yourself free from any barriers to your success so that you can make the major impact you're here to make while loving life every step of the way and without ever having to give up what matters most to you. Today we're going right to the point of origin of a trigger. In loosest terms, a trigger is something that causes an emotional reaction, whether it just be something you experience internally inside of you, or whether it's something that you may act out on through your behavior, or both. Triggers are directly related to stories. Really, your story is what causes a trigger. Stories occur to you as the truth, but they're usually rooted in subjective interpretation based on past experiences and survival intentions. I'm going to use some personal examples here as things we can all relate to and that tend to cause more emotional reactions. But really, this applies in every area of life, personally and professionally. When something happens, an event of some kind, let's just use as an example that a parent cancels a visit or breaks a promise of some kind that you were counting on, you immediately have an interpretation about what happened. There's an internal reaction that occurs, like feeling disappointed or let down, or maybe even really angry and pissed off. Thoughts may run through your head like, I knew I couldn't count on them. They've always cared more about my siblings than they have about me. Once again, I am completely on my own. And the moment you have that interpretation, you live as though your interpretation about what happened is what happened. Really, all that happened is they canceled. Everything else is your story or interpretation about it. Now, I am not suggesting that you should be like a robot and have no emotions about anything. But the big thing here is that your feelings are usually informed or driven by your thoughts or your beliefs. Thoughts like people or situations should be a certain way. And by the way, I just want to distinguish here that a belief is just a thought that you've thought so many times that you believe it to be true. But if those thoughts and feelings are resulting in you feeling at a loss of power, feeling completely out of alignment with who you really are and what matters to you, then maybe instead of being right about how it should be, you can take a more objective viewpoint and consider some alternate ways. For example, maybe consider that the other person involved in this scenario is just playing out their own survival intentions from their own past experiences. And maybe they don't have the knowledge or the tools or the resources to do anything differently. I know even with that, it's easy to think, but they should know better. There's resources out there, they should make use of them. But that's just more story and interpretation. And really, it's not just about the mechanics of this, it's about how we essentially collapse and have no distinction between what happened and our story about what happened, so it all becomes the truth. The event and your interpretation, essentially your response or reaction to the event, get so collapsed that there is no distinction, sometimes leaving just enough trace of what actually happened to make your story plausible. Your story occurs to you as the truth. You don't set out to lie about it. It's just what's true for you. So that my story is what happened. My story is the truth with a capital T. So back to that example where the parent cancels or breaks a promise, and you then have thoughts like, I'm all alone, I knew I couldn't count on them, I knew I never really mattered that much to them. Well, because you're the center of your universe, your truth with a little t becomes the ultimate truth. And then, here comes the big kicker. You ready for this? You go around life reacting to, ticked off about, and trying to overcome stuff that you made up. That's right. Soak it in. This is a universal human condition. We all do this. You're not bad or wrong for doing it, nor are you good and right when you don't do it. By the way, if you were to judge yourself for being good or bad, for making up or not making up stories, you know what that would be? More stories. When you notice that you're making up stories and then you judge yourself or you add meaning to the fact that you're making up stories, it's just more stories. Do you see the humor in this? It really is kind of ridiculous. And I'm telling you, we do this all the time. We humans are meaning-making machines. It's part of our survival. From the start of our existence here on this earth, we had to be able to decide in a split second, is that rustling sound in the trees just the wind blowing, or is that a saber-toothed tiger coming to eat me for dinner? So now that we're not running from saber-toothed tigers anymore, the opportunity here is to start developing and practicing judgment-free awareness. Judgment-free awareness is essentially being aware without adding any meaning or interpretation or judgment to it. Seeing something for what it really is, for what's actually happening, without adding any meaning or judgment or shaping it in any way. So when you feel triggered, you can be aware of having the reaction, and in that moment, distinguish what happened from your story about what happened. If you can master that, you will have ultimate power to choose. With awareness, you can respond in a way that's aligned with who you really are, instead of reacting from a place of fear or survival. Now, I'm going to give you a pitfall warning here. Do not go looking for how other people in your life, like your partner or your parents or your employees or your kids, are doing this. Yes, we humans, all of us, make up stories all the time. And this is about you breaking through your blocks and diffusing your triggers. And to do that, you got to get the impact on you individually for this and really master that first. Now, let's connect this to some other ways this may show up in your life and the impact your stories have. For example, maybe as a kid, dad left. Mom and dad got divorced and dad left. And maybe your interpretation or your story was, men can't be trusted. That probably plays out even now in adult life and how you trust or don't trust, how open or guarded you are. And not even just in romantic relationships, but maybe all over the place. Another one might be maybe you got a bad grade in school, or not as good of a grade as you had hoped to get. Your interpretation may be, I'm not as smart as everyone else. I have to work 10 times harder just to keep up. Stories like that leave you feeling like you don't measure up when you're around peers or people that are maybe as successful, maybe even not as successful as you, but you have this story still running you of you're not as successful and you have to work 10 times harder just to measure up to them. Maybe even at times feeling like you're chasing instead of leading. Another could be maybe a great friend of yours moves away and you have a story like, everybody leaves me. This was actually one of my own growing up. I lived in the Washington, D.C. area, which is very transient, and had new best friends practically every year because every time I'd get close to someone, by the end of the year, they would move away. And I realized quite a bit later in life, in my 20s, that I had this story like, everybody leaves me. Remember, it's not your life that has shaped you, your life experiences that have shaped you. It's your stories about your life that have made you who you are. The stories about your life have created your world as you know it and have hotwired those triggers that tend to set you off. One of my favorite quotes ever was from one of my coaching instructors, Josh Hornick, who said once, just in passing, like it was no big thing, we all fall into the trap of believing that the past actually happened. I thought that was the most freaking brilliant thing I had ever heard that pretty much sums up this whole concept. We all fall into the trap sometimes of believing that the past actually happened. Because really, what we think is the past, what we think actually happened, is completely shielded, jaded, tainted by our interpretations and stories about what actually happened. So here are some steps you can walk yourself through in those moments when you may feel triggered. 1, ask yourself, what actually happened? And what's my story about what happened? Simply making that distinction is a mammoth step toward empowerment and freedom and never getting triggered again. 2, ask yourself, is this story aligned with who I really am? Or another way you can look at that is this leading me toward what I want and what matters to me? Or is this story leading me away from what I want and what matters to me? Sometimes when we're in the thick of things or in the heat of an emotion or a reaction, it's easy to lose sight of that. But if you can tune in and notice, is this getting me where I want, or is this totally pulling me off track? Again, that in itself gives you an opportunity to pause and choose. 3, what other ways could this occur to me? Meaning, what other, perhaps more aligned or empowering ways can I interpret this? 4, how, if at all, is this story serving me? What payoffs am I getting out of this interpretation? And what is this interpretation costing me? This one can be much more advanced, as we tend to not really want to own up to the payoffs we get out of things that may always not be in our best interest. If you want more guidance on this one, grab my free masterclass linked in the description below at spencersnakard.com/masterclass. Practice these 4 steps to work on mastering the technique of really distinguishing between what actually happened and your story or interpretation about what happened, and you will greatly diffuse the volume and intensity of the triggers in your life. Be sure to click subscribe to be alerted to new videos every week, and I'll see you in the next one.